Hello.
Okay.
Another one.
Communication.
Communication today on agenda.
And wherever else it goes.
Indeed, we've been talking about polarization, how it's difficult to communicate on all parts of the spectrum. Yeah, there's a lot of tribalism going on, and Laura, you found in your community that there's big difficulty, even within the people who identify as the awakened, they find it difficult to get along.
Yeah, I think there's what I'm observing is that people are very, very stuck in their own views. And there seems to be a bit of a struggle for many people to be able to see another person's view or perspective or belief or whatever, and just appreciate it and just observe that they have a different view, and perhaps, then communicate, oh, I have a different view, and have a kind of mature exchange. That seems to be a bit lacking in some places, because what I've noticed is, like, if I post something, for example, I'll post something which is like, it's my view, it's my perspective, it's public, it's not aimed at a particular person, it's not intended to try and tell them they're wrong or what they should and shouldn't do. It's, it's my perspective. I believe everyone just should believe and do what they want to do. But often it will, if it doesn't completely align with the way they think, there is a reaction which is very defensive or attacking or telling you you're wrong, trying to kind of be right, like my beliefs are right, yours aren't. And there's a lot of like conflict energy that I'm observing it. I don't get it so much on like Instagram, for example, but like LinkedIn, it happens a lot. And that's just an observation that I'm making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you see, there's a lot of stuff coming up, isn't it, in people's lives, and people just discover how reactive, or maybe they don't even notice they are reactive, but they are being provoked to react.
Yeah, well, they perceive it as a provocation, I think, and again, as you say, like, it really comes down to our awareness. So if we're aware, oh, I'm getting triggered, what's this about? I'm going to think about it, I'm going to take a break, maybe I'll respond later, like maybe I won't respond. That requires awareness. If you don't have the awareness in the first place and you're just on autopilot and you're just emotionally reacting, then you're just going to keep doing it. So I think that's why bringing awareness to it is important, because everybody does it or has done it in the past. It's just being human. But I think, yeah, bringing that awareness to it, and if you choose to, you can start to actually, look at it more deeply and more with that greater awareness. And, I think, as you said, people's stuff is coming up. I think because just generally in the collective, with everything that's happening in the world, people are feeling like more and more squeezed. And when that happens, like when more you're squeezed, the more stuff like starts to come up, stuff we've talked about this before, stuff you've suppressed from the past, things you weren't even aware of from the past. Our nervous systems are not necessarily in a good condition because of all of the stress that we've been experiencing. And so all of these things can contribute to us being more reactive. But I think you were saying before, when we were chatting before recording, about this kind of need for certainty.
That's right. Yeah, especially when things are increasingly uncertain and the goalposts are being shifted all the time. There's everyone wants to be certain, but there's no guarantee of that. So, and also, the brain just, the left hemisphere brain, it really focuses on, it needs the data, and we've been kind of trained in the culture to get the proof, get the evidence, get
proof. I want the proof.
It may be bullshit, but at least it's presented as evidence. So I just go with that. It's like, it's better than nothing. So It's easy to bullshit ourselves, but increasingly as we go into it, awareness, you say we need the awareness, but the awareness is also the awareness of uncertainty. And like you said, being able to face the reality that no one perspective is 100% right.
Yeah.
And there's no immunity to propaganda. Even you and I are not immune. We all have a degree of noise in our understanding of the world. That's why we need dialogue and dialogical understanding, so we can actually compare our view with someone else's view. But if we're only interested in being right, then we're not going to get anywhere, right? We need to be interested in actually working out what is truth, what is the case.
Yeah.
And that requires, it's not merely a technical thing to do. You have to actually think about, oh, not being right, that's no pleasure, right? So you need to go away from the pleasure of being right and actually thinking, okay, I can give up this piece of ego and for the the precious piece of a more accurate view of the world, which I can attain together with someone else, and ideally with a great number of people. Because see, the complexity of the issues we're facing, first time in history, we have everything's interconnected. We have more information that our poor brains, hunter-gatherer brains, can process. So how can we even make sense of the world? We cannot. So we do need other people, individuals, to coordinate with. But what happens is that we are evolutionarily, we want to be in a tribe. We talked about that. And because of that, we end up in these bubbles and we think we feel secure, but we don't really know what's outside of the bubble. So we really need to get out of the bubble and reach out to the more radically different views we can encounter that can inform our own perspective, the better off we are, really. No?
Yeah. And I think that for me, there's a couple of different things. So I think if we're looking to kind of find out about something, or we're not sure about something, then I think speaking with other people and getting different views and having conversations is incredibly helpful, because it just kind of helps us to then formulate our own thoughts. And then I think there's another thing, which is kind of when we get to a point of just knowing, it's like I say, I know I don't need saving from anything, right? I don't need to speak to other people to know that. That is like an inner knowing. That's like my deep connection with my heart and with source. Like I don't need that. Like I'm good. And so it isn't, I think when it comes down to kind of our personal beliefs and like what we feel is right for us, in those instances, we don't need to talk to other people because no one else knows what's right for us, But when we're trying to like find out stuff, when we're trying to formulate conclusions about things, like what's going on in the world or whatever, like, rather than just saying like no and arguing with somebody, it's about being open to that information. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to have a conversation with them. So like on social media, for example, it's not even that helpful to have conversations, because you can't have a proper conversation using text. There's so many misinterpretations. Having a proper conversation with somebody is like a really good way to do it. But I think on social media, it's kind of limited. And if someone is trying to tell you that you're wrong and that what you believe is wrong and the way you live your life is wrong, like some of those fundamental things that we just kind of know inside us, and people are challenging those, I'm like, I don't want to have a discussion with you about that. Like, I'm like, you do you. That's my view, is like, you do you. Like, whatever you believe in, whatever you want to do, like, I'm not telling you what to do. You do what you want. And then that seems to make them even angrier.
Right, because they want to provoke you and they know they're not getting to you. They can't get under your skin and they're frustrated, because that's how they always get people to pay attention to them.
This is it.
Right? Because the difference is you've been there and you've sorted it out with hard work. Like, okay, you get triggered, you think about it, you work on it, year later or whatever, you kind of it doesn't work anymore. And then you do one by one, like Hydra's heads. Yeah, you just sort it out. And some people just don't want to do the work. but
No.
and therefore the less they can do the less they're willing to do the work, the more right they want to be, because they have this illusion of having to have some security of judgment.
Yeah, well, again, it's this thing about being the need to be right. The need to be right. The need to be to know more than other people. The need to be superior, and that's all ego. That's all wounded ego stuff. But we've got to be aware of that. So when we're doing that, we need to be aware of it. I mean, I wouldn't go to somebody and say like, "Oh, you shouldn't be a Muslim. You shouldn't be Christian. You shouldn't believe this. You shouldn't believe that." Like, no, like, why would I tell someone they shouldn't believe what they believe if they're talking about facts and things which are kind of like have I guess a lot of evidence, you know, like the jab is dangerous. Well, there's so much evidence for that. Like, so if someone's like, "Oh no, it's completely safe," you can say, "Well, I have different information," and you can offer that. But I think trying to argue with people and force them to see things the way you see things is a control thing. It's the need for certainty, it's the need for control, it's the ego, and that's all rooted in fear and trauma.
Absolutely. And it's the way it's always been up until now, that it kind of the world went by with these protocols. You know, you had one religion fighting another religion, this party, that party, this country, that country. And now we are arriving at this time when people are so mixed up that the ones who actually are committed to, you know, sort themselves out, they just don't want to buy into this bullshit. But it does, you know, you need to do the work. And if you don't do the work, then you still want to have a dialogue, but you have to qualify for dialogue, really. You know, it's nice to say, yes, we should reach out, we should seek dialogue and seek communication. But if it's asymmetrical, if you have one person doing the work and trying to reach out and trying to understand the other from every angle, and the other is not really, it's rigid and doesn't really do any effort, then, like you say, you cannot, well, you're not ready. When you sort this out, when you qualify yourself for, you know, being eager and being earnest to rather finding, you know, the truth, improving your own view and finding out how we can both co-evolve into some better understanding, then if we both have that goal, then that's great, because then we can, that's what it's about. But otherwise it's waste of my energy and waste of your energy. And
yeah,
I don't want to feed your anger, and you're just wasting my time at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you have to, if you're going to have dialogue, it needs to be with someone who is approaching it from the same kind of stance as you. You know, we're having this dialogue to, you know, to understand each other and to maybe, you know, be open to other perspectives and other ideas. But you have to both be on that page. And when you're not, as you just said, it doesn't work. So sometimes people will make they'll say, "You're wrong," or they'll tell me what I should believe. And I'll usually just try and start with curiosity. And I think curiosity is a really key thing, because rather than jumping in with telling someone they're wrong or just giving your view and saying, "No, it's this way," try and understand what they even mean in the first place, because often, especially if we're sharing something on social media, it gets misinterpreted. So people don't say to me, "Oh, I'm curious, what do you actually mean by that? Do you mean, I feel like you mean this, is that actually what you mean?" What they do is they make an assumption about what I mean, and then they get angry about that assumption, and then they react and lash out about that assumption, which is usually wrong. It's not what I was actually saying. So, you know, I did this recent post where I said, like, you don't need, no one's coming to save you. And I mentioned, you know, like politicians, like the Galactic Federation, and I mentioned Jesus, and people start, you know, attacking me, saying like that I'm wrong. You're like, how dare you speak out against Jesus and all these things. And I'm like, that's actually not what it's about at all. Like, and people's understanding of what believing in Christ, whatever, even means is different. Because I've spoken with lots of different people about it, and people have different interpretations. And so when you make a judgment on what someone means by something, rather than actually asking them to clarify before you start, acting out. I mean, it's helpful to ask. And so I try and say, well, what do you mean by that? So when someone says to me, recent comment, you do need saving. That's what they said to me. I'm saying, I don't feel I need saving from anything. And they told me, no, you're wrong. You do need saving. And I said, well, what does that actually mean? What does that look like? What do I need saving from? What does being saved mean? And why do you think you know what's best for me? Those are genuine questions, because I want to understand what that statement means. And they don't answer. They just lash out further and just keep repeating themselves. And so this is a perfect example of what you just mentioned. You cannot have a dialogue with somebody that's meaningful and productive if they're not approaching it from that kind of same sort of frame of mind, of wanting to understand and share.
Exactly. And there's two things that come to my mind. One is this humility of actually realizing that there's no way you will understand everything that the person says, because it's another person with their own language, with their own whatever. They come from another place. So they may use even the same words. They mean different things by these words.
Yes, totally.
And that kind of humility, it seems straightforward, but if you exist within a certain discourse, if you, let's say you're a person that trusts the news, and in the news, every argument is black or white, or everything is polarized, and, anyone having the slightest doubt is already anti something, then you're being programmed, because you don't realize that you adopt this ready-made vocabulary, you adopt it. And you think, because everyone around you, most of the people around you use that already, then, like Chomsky said, you're allowed to debate within a very narrow scope of discourse that's predetermined by the public authorities or whatever. Yeah. And then if you go anywhere beyond that, you're already stigmatized. If you dare to have your mind open and not accept the imposed structure of the argument or vocabulary, maybe once you start actually looking into language and how language can be used in a manipulative way, so that and not even you can present facts in a different way, and which produce completely different reactions, in people. There was this study by Leda Boroditsky. She said she works, she's a linguist in America, so in one of the universities, and there was this study. She said a fictional city where they had two groups of people, and they presented a scenario of a city which is in crisis. What was it? There was a lot of crime in that city. In one case, everything the same, like graphs, numbers, statistics, were the same, given to one group of people, with crime being called a virus, and the other group of people got the exactly same scenario with the crime being a beast, I think. So they personified crime as virus in one case and as a beast in another. So, and then there were targeted questions for these participants. How will they react? What should they do? What should the communities do? What should authorities do? And where the virus version was like, oh, there should be more healthcare, maybe, spreading awareness, social awareness, workshops, stuff like that, community gatherings, making people, inoculated against disease, etc., etc. And then when there was a beast, people are like, oh, more police force, like anything that to go with punishment and dealing with crime. So, but none of those people realized and then they were asked, the second stage of the experiment was they asked them, why did you think that? Why did you think that they should do these things and not something else? Oh, because of the numbers. Look, all the graphs. Yeah, because you showed me that this and this and this, and no one paid attention to what actually was subliminal in the setup. There was subliminal. No one paid attention to the way in which the problem was identified. So if you identify a problem by, you create imagination and you associate it with a particular reaction, or particular emotion, I guess, that then feeds different ways of dealing with it, despite the numbers being the same. So that's quite, and people are not really aware of it, because why should they? Because no one teaches that at school. No one teaches you how language can be a weapon.
No, of course not. Well, it's purposefully not taught, because the purpose of schools is to make you an obedient slave and to not have these skills that we actually kind of really need and that actually really benefit us. And just picking up on what you said about words meaning different things to different people, I think this is one of the really big challenges with communication, because we all have our own meanings about what words mean. So even the word awakening, for example, being awake, many people use that word to mean, or when they hear that word, they think it means you're aware of the agendas and all the, stuff that's going on out there. And I think that's one element to it. But then others will talk about awakening, and what they're talking about is more of the inner awakening, the spiritual awakening. And so you get people talking about awakening, but they're actually talking about two kind of different parts of it, or different sides of it. And then there's confusion and arguing, and it's like you're just thinking of your meaning of the same word is just different. And so many words, they have different, you can interpret them differently. And as you said, we interpret things based on our conditioning, based on what we've read, what we've learned, what we know, what we've experienced. We're all completely unique. And that's why, as you said, you can't fully understand what it's like to be someone else. You're not them. So you can't ever fully, you can relate to people, you can empathize, you can kind of go, oh yeah, it's similar for me, but you can't really know what it's like to be them. And therefore you also can't know exactly what's best for them and what's the right thing for them, because it's going to always differ. And I think when you can get to that point of understanding and acceptance, things get a lot easier. Like when you're not trying to change others, when you're not trying to force your opinions on people, it takes a lot of energy, and it doesn't feel good when you're doing that. It's just so much more freeing just to say, you know what, I'm gonna share the things that I share, and I accept that people are all going to interpret it in their own way, and they're going to do what they want to do, and they're going to believe what they believe, and we're all just really unique. And if someone's interested in understanding more, they're interested in having some kind of dialogue about it from a mature place, then that's cool and that's helpful. But this need to just it's control. Like I keep coming back to it, but it's about control.
I think, to see the bright side of it, I think it's a sign of people being forced to face it. Yep. Because they will have to arrive like we have arrived. I mean, I used to be very argumentative and very egotistical.
Me too.
Because we were very bad. I suspect, because we're quite similar in many ways. And I suppose when you're really bad, you have to you address it quicker, because it really takes its toll on you, right? So you address it, and then you're kind of in the front row. But then you're seeing people doing that. Yeah, there's not to judge them, but
no,
they're just a different stage of the journey, and you support them however you can. But if they, like, I had a friend, from old days, like old friend, and we got on some level, like in certain respects, very, very well, and we've had good experiences, and like school days, long friendship. But then he got back to me at some point, and started texting, and we had an exchange, and so his mom is a doctor, and he always liked medicate meds, and like kind of, you know, he completely mocked my stance as being a heterodox approach to the whole meta-crisis problem, you know, and the whole anything conspiratorial is in the bin right now, before, you know, like, so all of that. And I really kind of observed my interaction, because I know the guy, and the previous interaction was maybe 2 years ago. And now I had this interaction with him, and he really tried he knows me. So he knows where to press my buttons, but he really tried from different angles, like to get me, to provoke me to get less reasonable in my argument. And there's this kind of, I managed to neutralize it. So it kind of made me feel it was great to observe it. Like, and I ended up just leaving it. You know, I stopped texting back. It's like you, I didn't have to, it wasn't a stranger. So I didn't really have to explain anything, because he knows me. But I just kind of thought, give him time, you know, like he will need some time. And it was great to see that what the things that would trigger me in the past did not trigger now. So it's a nice test to observe it, isn't it? When you
absolutely. This is all, observing that stuff is all signs that we're healing and that we're evolving. Like every time we behave differently in a certain situation where, you know, maybe in the past we'd have got really angry, and now we notice that we are able to just feel it and let it go, like, or we maybe got triggered or we reacted, and then this time we didn't. That shows that we've changed. Like, and it's great. And I think it's really important to observe that. And as you said, for me, there's no judgment on people. Like, there's no right, wrong, good, bad. Like, everyone is just where they're at. There's no superiority. It's not like, oh, I'm better than you. Like, it's not. I just see everyone is on their own journey, and they're going to learn and evolve at their own pace. And I think it's important that when we're communicating with people, we just have that awareness. Like, not everyone is like us. Not everyone is thinking like us. Everyone is so unique. And so I think understanding that is really critical. It isn't that they're necessarily wrong. They're just believing what they believe with the information and experience and level of emotional maturity or whatever it is that they have. And I think if everyone could just see each other like that as a starting point, that would be really helpful, because at the end of the day, we're all just doing our best. Like, we're all people. So when we start attacking somebody for their views, that's not really helping anything. That's not making lives better. That's not making the world a better place. I just think there needs to be more understanding and compassion for other people when we're entering into, you know, kind of any kind of like judgment or you know, conversation with them. And
so, and there needs to be this humility to actually understand that what I want to say, that a beautiful sunset today, red sky. I was going to say that, because you said, because everyone's on their own journey, and we, you know, everyone evolves at their own pace, and people would watch it and say, so you think you're so evolved and I'm not evolved. It's like, also not that. It's like, everyone has different prompts to focus on different things at different stages of life, right? And for me, for example, I had to focus on I guess just choosing the good stuff, because I was so bad. When you get really bad, when your life is threatened, when you can't trust yourself, what you'll do, I just had to go right or left. That was like about 12 years ago, and I chose right. And then it took many years until you actually purge all the kind of, you know, the protocols which are still kind of destructive and defective. And so, like you said, everyone has to have this this good intention and this compassionate, approach, but that means you put the good of the interaction above your good feeling about yourself in it, right? So,
and that's really challenging.
The intention behind the conversation must be to produce understanding higher than you already have or that person already has, but irrelevant, independently of however you feel about them. So I think it's this ego, but I don't want to talk about ego and there's a lot of poppy understanding of it. Ego is very important. Like, ego means that you are aware of your body and you have boundaries, and there's a lot of good, function. There's functionality about being ego, and if you don't have ego, you just get, get moved around.
It's necessary. It's just when it takes over and becomes out of control, that's when it's a problem.
When it's a tyrant on the purpose of building meaning, right, and building shared understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the what you said about intention is key. It's like, what's my intention entering into this, making this comment or entering into this conversation? What is my intention? And again, it's just all self-reflection. It's all looking within and asking ourselves, like, what's my intention here? Like, am I triggered? Am I going into it wanting to prove that I'm right? Am I going into it, wanting to really understand the other person and kind of maybe perhaps be open to expanding my perspective? What's my intention? And I think also what you said about, we're not saying, and I'm certainly not saying, like, oh, I know more than people or I'm superior to people. Like, no, we are all learning and growing and evolving. I change all the time. I change my perspectives all the time. Like, the things I believed and the views that I had 2 years ago on certain things, totally different now. And so I'm always reflecting, listening, it's like trying on ideas, right? It's like I try stuff on. I'm like, how does that feel to me? Does that make sense to me? How does that feel to me? Like, and then I just decide. And so it isn't that anyone's better than anybody else. Like, but even that perception, oh, you think you're better than me, that's down to our own stuff, right? Because even if the person does think they're better than you and they're in their ego, why do you care? Why do we care? Why do we get so upset by it all? Well, it's all like our wounding and our ego and like our wounded part of our ego. So, all these things that are unresolved. Someone says something maybe that, I don't know, suggests that you're not intelligent, and you have this trauma wound from being at school and told, I had at school, they would tell me I was stupid. Literally, they would tell me I was stupid. So then if someone says like, oh, you're stupid, like, I would get like triggered, of course, because of my past stuff. But then I brought an awareness to that. I started becoming more aware and realizing, oh, okay, like I see there's something happening here. Let me feel that, let me look into it, like, let me kind of see where that comes from and do some healing around that. And then, so then now it doesn't have that potency that it had before. But even, when it comes to that stuff, to like the healing stuff, I only learned to look within and do the healing stuff because I heard other people doing it. I look at other people's content, other people's shares, and there's parts of it that I'm like, yeah, that resonates. And there's other parts where I say, no, that doesn't resonate. And I like to think of it like, whenever anybody shares anything, I take what's helpful and I just leave what doesn't. Take what's helpful, leave what doesn't. I'm like, if I share something, if it's helpful for you, that's awesome. If it's not, you can just move along. Like, you don't have to get angry about it or get attached. Like, it's just move along. but we often can't, right? So we get kind of stuck in these things. And also, one thing that just sprung to mind is, when we're communicating online, I think it's very, very different to communicating when you're in person with somebody, in the sense that most of the things I think people say to each other online, they wouldn't dare say to someone's face if they were in the room with them. I mean,
absolutely. Well, yeah, that's part of the evolutionarily, we can communicate, like good communication you can do within like 150 faces. When 150, the Dunbar number is called, we've evolved in these kind of bands of up to 150 people where you can, if anyone doesn't communicate well or does something bad, they can be held accountable, and this whole community, and you actually
it's like a
have
self-governing,
right, is that you can implement checks, the social checks on good communication, because if someone's a liar, they will not do very well. But then see, now we are connected, billions of people connected via these networks, and people just behave like assholes because they can, and it's difficult to find, to even feel compassion for someone who's just an avatar, and you see the digital rendition of them and the face photo, and you see a quote they post or something. It's easy to be an asshole, and it's difficult to empathize because you don't know them. You can't see the body language or anything, so you don't really know them. So now we're in this, we have these Paleolithic emotions, and which react as if that person online was the real person, because brain doesn't understand. Brain is just thinks, oh, that's a person. 1,000 years ago, that was a person too. But now my brain thinks you're in this room, but obviously you're on the screen. So
and sometimes it's not even a real person. A lot of the time it's actually a bot.
It's bot.
Not actually real. You're like, how much time have you spent arguing with a bot? And
right, with a bot, wasting your life away. Because this is just the Matrix, allegory, isn't it? Like even like your human energy goes into something that's completely artificial and unreal. But but see, this is the challenge we have, because we have this evolutionary conditioning, and it's applied to a completely different context. There's a mismatch, and we freak out, obviously. But I mean, we freak out more if we don't understand that's the case. Once you understand, you kind of realize, okay, well, I better come down, because I don't want to live my life.
There's a lot of power in that, just having that awareness and being the observer.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not then a victim to it. You're not out of control. Like you can see it, and even if you then go ahead and do the thing, and then you're like, oh God, I shouldn't have sent that message, and because we've all done it,
right?
But if you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, but you don't have that awareness, you're not going to be able to to create any shifts. Whereas if you've got the awareness, and you can say, oh, I really could have phrase that better, or I really was a bit mean there, like, and just being able to recognize it, I think is really very, very powerful. And that for me is the first step. It's just bringing awareness to things and just noticing, like, even after you've had certain interactions, noticing how you feel. Notice, like, if you were triggered and you reacted, noticing if you wish you hadn't said what you said, like, whatever, no judgment, because we just do these things. But having that awareness, and the more aware we become, the more mindful we become of our communication. And I just want to elaborate on something you just said, which was really, about the kind of online, we have, these kind of digital versions almost of people. There's if we exclude the bots and stuff, there is a real person behind that keyboard or phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happened is we've become increasingly kind of dehumanized. So because so much interaction is online, we don't, when you're with somebody, you can feel their energy, you can see them, you're in the presence of a real person, and that really does make a difference. And I think this is why people, they'll say all these things online that they just wouldn't say to you if they were like in a room with you. They might still be mean to you or whatever, like they might still do that, but I think it's really extreme online. And I think it's very like, we'll just make flippant comments because we're not actually in the presence of a human. We're just in the presence of a screen. And so our brain just doesn't, it's not the same. We don't think it's like, kind of unconsciously, it's not real to us. It's like this different kind of world. And it also kind of allows, I think a lot of the reason why we get a lot of like trolling and things, like people that purposefully go on to be like awful to others, it's an easy way of lashing out and just projecting your stuff without any accountability, because you can create a false profile, which a lot of people do, and you can just go on and do whatever you want and no one knows who you are. Now, none of those people who do all that trolling stuff would do it in person or to a group of people in their own community. Like, they just wouldn't do it. And so, yeah, there's this really strange disconnect with, you know, the way we see people on the, you know, especially on social media. And, you know, they just have this tiny little picture, and sometimes they don't even have a picture. And so you're just interacting really with a screen and with your own stuff and your own perceptions. And so, yeah, I think it isn't so much that, you know, someone said to me the other day, like, humans have become worse. And I'm like, no, they haven't become worse. It's just that the outside pressures, the technology, all of these things have brought things out and also trained us to be a certain way. They are literally training us to be kind of inhumane almost, and like not see people as people, because it's just all online. And I think that's why it's also really important that we have real life interactions with humans, whether it's this way or in actual person in our lives, you know, so that we're not just living out our lives on a screen, because we really do get trained to be
right,
to be very different and to communicate in a different way.
Yes, and I think, just not to get into I think a lot of that is set, it's simply because the business model is that the more people react, the more money is made, because there's more clicking going on and more typing.
Oh yeah.
But well, I suppose it also serves the purpose of polarizing and everything, which is politically useful, but also, yeah, so there's lack of accountability, and people don't, it's not like in real you have all the evolutionary things, you know, even when you connect with an eye contact, you have eye contact, and the stuff, that the hormones that go in your body and the chemistry that's being released through that, even the scientists can't even explain how it works, but it works. It's been so long, so many thousands of years, you know, doing that. And you remove that, and you remove empathy, you remove like fundamental mammalian mechanisms within, you know, so it's very, very important. And then to go back to what you said, because, you know, I think amongst our core values is sovereignty and empowering ourselves and people, isn't it? This is where we start and end. And think about, when we're triggered, we lose our sovereignty. We lose the power over ourselves. We lose autonomy, because even when you use language in a fit of rage, that means you are possessed by this feeling. It feels great. I mean, as great as being drunk may feel. It's a toxic.
Yeah.
It's a
in
toxic
the moment,
feeling.
it feels good.
It feels good, but it's intoxicating. It's adrenaline. It's all the, you know, stuff that is not really good for you. But it's just you're addicted to getting pleasure in this way, for being right and being angry. But you see, you lose your sovereignty. And for me, it was a massive shift when I realized that, because, you know, I really like angry, because I like this angry music. I still like it. I still listen to it. But when I was engaged in this stuff, it creates a very good illusion of strength without making you deal with your weakness. So you can really build this mask of strength out of cowardice to address what has to be addressed. But that you need to be vulnerable. And that's not nice. If you want to feel really strong, because you probably feel unconsciously very weak, then the last thing you want to do is to be vulnerable. But that's the gate through which you need to go to actually acquire strength, to look into your weakness, and through understanding where you are weak and looking into this abyss of what you'd most despise from that mindset about yourself, right?
Yeah.
You actually get relieved, and you actually work through, you accept it, like that's the first step, isn't it? You accept, yeah, fair enough, and then look back and like, why would that be? Yeah, because maybe parents, maybe school, maybe, yeah, being bullied somewhere or stuff like that, like you mentioned, and actually have compassion for that kid who, you were just a kid. Like it wasn't your fault. Why do you give yourself shit for that?
Well, this is another thing. We blame ourselves so
right.
much, and
you
then
like,
that just makes it worse. Yeah.
It's like 7 years old. Like, why do you blame a 7-year-old kid? Everyone had something like that. Every single person had a moment, or at least one of, that they just felt hurt and they never addressed it. And it's okay. Like, you have to go through it, and to retain your sovereignty and to regain it, you actually have to regulate yourself emotionally. So then, and understand where you get triggered, and that being triggered, because one person told me that was kind of it was very late. It was 2 years ago. Like, there was a person that really could press my buttons very well, and I spoke to another person about that and said, why do you give them so much power? And it's like, oh, what do you mean? Why do you give them so much power? Well, that's what you do. Like those people online in LinkedIn, when they were really angry with you not needing savior, and what they've done, they gave you the power basically, and because you
they gave their power away.
They gave the power away.
It's like you give your power away when you do that, because like I feel when I'm kind of really grounded in like what I know is right for me at this point in time, it could change, but when I know what's right for me, and people are just like arguing with me and like sending me, like crappy messages, they're not damaging me. Like they're not, they're doing it to them. They're doing it to themselves. And I think when we're triggered, like I've kind of trained myself to see triggering as a gift. So if I feel triggered, I'm like, thank you to myself. I'm like, thank you. Like, what's this about? Because it isn't that triggering is like bad. It's natural. All humans feel triggered, because of course we're emotional beings. Like, we're not supposed to be stone cold. Like, we are just emotional beings. But if I feel that feeling inside me, like, oh, the triggered feeling, everyone knows it. Then I say, okay, like what, like, okay, I'm triggered. Like, let me feel it. Let me take a step back, and let me deal with it, and look at myself. Like, what could this be? So we can actually see it as a good thing rather than shaming ourselves. Because what I used to do in the past was I'd judge myself and feel guilty and shame myself and be like, oh, like, I don't know what happened. Like, I just like lashed out at this person because I didn't understand it was just my inner child that was still, the wounded inner child part that was just being automatically triggered physiologically. Like, it doesn't come from conscious, thoughts. It can come just like that automatically. But when I started learning about that, I learned to have more like compassion for myself and just be like, okay, like I can learn from it. Like, I don't need to feel ashamed about it. If I've done something like mean to someone, I'll apologize. But if I've just, just kind of been a bit, then I can just say like, okay, like, let me learn from it. Let me learn from it and move on. Like, there's no point like getting into that kind of self-judgment and shame and all of that stuff.
Because also the self-judgment and shame and guilt, these are initially from back then as well, aren't they? So those are reactions of a scared kid who felt threatened and felt insecure and inadequate, whatever the situation was. And you get the fight, flight, freeze or fawn kind of survival mode. And, so on the animal level is like there's a survival mode. You want to survive, so you threaten. And it's good to then remember that when you were a kid, maybe the threat was real even. Maybe it was genuinely abusive, and horrible situation. It could have been for many people. And but now you're feeling that, you're replaying that tape from that moment, but now you are safe. It's good to remember that. First of all, have this compassion for the kid, fair enough. And second, you are in a safe place. You're an adult. It's a completely different context. So your body just it's misinterpreting the trigger, and that really neutralizes that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And also to bear in mind that, you know, when we get triggered, it's very much to do with our nervous system. And so the state of our nervous system and trauma is stored in the body. So that's why it's important to have that mindfulness and be able to have that conscious thinking that you've just described, but also to do things at a somatic level that actually help our nervous system to regulate, because it happens so instantly. You know, we've all been in situations where you were feeling fine and then something happened and you literally like had an outburst or you reacted, and it's like you didn't even have control over it. Like it just happens. And then afterwards you say, oh my goodness, like what was wrong with me? Like what happened there? Like
which moment? What did it?
Yeah.
What was the trigger?
Yeah, I'm like,
worse.
How did that happen? But it's because it's stored in the body, and so we have to, you know, address it in terms of our awareness and our mind. You know, we can do inner child healing, shadow work, all that kind of stuff, but also nervous system work, because what we're doing is we're healing this stuff that happened in the past, and it just keeps getting reinforced and reinforced throughout our entire lives, and that's why we, you know, react the way we do. And I think, you know, there's certain things where it's not that all of our emotions are necessarily from trauma. I want to be clear about that, because let's say, for example, someone attacks your loved one. If you're upset about that or angry about that, that's not your trauma. That's like there's certain things which are like natural, you know, like natural inbuilt healthy emotions. The difference is when you are getting like super triggered over like what kind of small, like insignificant things that later you realize are insignificant. And yeah, being able to just be aware of that. And the more I've done this work, the more I've uncovered like all these things from my childhood. And then it perfectly explains why I would get upset about certain things. You know, like when I was a child, like I was never listened to. I wasn't, like, if I ever tried to say how I felt or express myself, I was, you know, told to shut up, or I was told I was wrong, or I was made fun of, ridiculed. And so then when I grew up, anytime that kind of similar scenario, I would perceive that similar scenario happening, I would get like massively triggered, and it would just happen. But I didn't have that level of awareness at that point to actually go, oh, I'm getting triggered because of like my earlier life stuff and this and that. I didn't have that awareness. Hadn't learned about trauma. It wasn't something it wasn't on my radar. I just kind of kept doing these like automatic patterns. And then the more I became aware, and the more I worked on it, the lesser it is. And to the point now where I am able to communicate, you know, I communicate a lot of stuff online, and I get misunderstood and people get angry, and I mean, it's a minority of people, but it still happens, or people tell me I'm wrong or I'm stupid, and I don't get that emotional surge. It might irritate me, but I don't get the emotional surge, and I don't feel highly reactive, which is what used to happen. So again, like you were saying earlier, oh, I noticed I'm different now. Like there's a lot of power in that, and in noticing that, I think, and it can really, really help for us not only to communicate more effectively, but I think just generally it's less negative energy being put out there, and it's also healthier for us, because if we're getting irritated and angry all the time by stuff, especially online, that's not good for our health. And it's also not good for the other person, and it's also not good in general, like the energy that you're putting out. So it doesn't benefit anybody. And so I think when we can just work on that and be aware, and it's just the constant awareness. It's a constant journey. You don't reach perfection.
Never.
There's no end point. It's just a daily journey of just coming back to, I think this is important, coming back to self. Because we just go off, or we're like, we're just stuck in this online world, or we get sucked into a documentary and then we're fretting about everything, and but when we can just come back to ourselves and we have that awareness, and we can kind of come back and ground and come back into our heart, then we can almost reset. It's like, okay, I flew off, now I'm back. Okay, I'm aware, I see that, maybe do what you need to do. And then, so it's just this lovely journey of just constant noticing and choosing, making different choices, doing the work that we need to do. And just over time, you just find that you just change and you evolve, but you never get to a final destination. So anyway, I had someone the other day that said to me, I've healed all my trauma. Like, I don't have any issues, and my ego is like completely like gone. And no, I don't think so, but okay.
Yes, and that's also very challenging for many people, because like it's so much perfectionism, which springs from kind of narcissistic culture, isn't it? And everyone wants to be the best and most beautiful and whatnot. And so this perfectionism is again the inner critic of the wounded little kid. And yeah, so we're never really perfect, and we shouldn't want to be perfect, because that's what's beautiful about being human, that we make silly mistakes and we kind of stupid and fallible, and that's why we're unique. That's why we're not
it's
machines,
just being
right?
human.
It's all right.
Human. It's just being on the journey. And so this is why, like, I think, it's important also to just have a light heart about it, and to even see the humor in it. Like how crazy we can act sometimes, and like the things that humans do, and just the human condition and all of these things, it just is what it is. And yeah, we're just all these unique beings on this unique journey. And as long as we're doing our best at the time, and we're just learning, and we're just, we make a mistake. Okay, well, like, okay, that happens. Forgive myself, learn from it, and then just try and make a better choice next time. And then, if you don't, you go, oh, I did it again.
Yeah, I suppose
it's just that constant awareness and just coming back and just reflecting. And over time, you do just evolve. And it isn't, you're not trying to get to a state of perfection, or never getting triggered, or never saying a wrong word. Like, that's just not life.
You're super. Yeah, it's the challenge, as always, is finding the golden mean between having feeling for yourself, having this compassion for yourself on one hand, and on the other hand, not to be too easy with yourself. If you're a little shit, then you should really kind of bring yourself to responsibility, right? You must.
Yeah, well, this is where the responsibility and accountability comes in,
right?
So it's
but
like,
don't be mean to yourself. Just okay. So give yourself a slap, maybe, but don't throw yourself into a pit. So don't get resentful. But it's tricky, because it requires this dialogue with yourself. So we talk about communication, how we communicate with others. It's ultimately the outward communication is only a reflection of our inward communication, isn't it? How we relate to ourselves will be then reflected how we reflect outside.
And we project stuff, right? So if we've got wounding, or we're we're in a bad mood or whatever, we'll tend to just project that out. And that's typically what happens. And I think, like, I agree with you. I mean, we shouldn't like be out there just being terrible to everybody and then going, oh, but I forgive myself, like, every time. Like, I think it really again comes back to that awareness and the willingness to to come back and to try and make better choices. It's that willingness and that intention to just better yourself. So yeah, we don't get stuck in that judgment. And look, I know I've spoken with people who they're still upset about something they did to someone years ago. And so there's a lot of like forgiveness and letting go, because you can't change the past. So you can either hold on to that stuff, which is heavy, or you can let it go, but at the same time, like, have you learned from it? Like, are you a better person? Like, did you use it as a gift? Did you use it as a lesson for learning? And that for me is what's important. It isn't like you've done what you've done, okay, but now what are you going to do? Like, now how are you going to communicate? Or now how are you going to behave? And what do you need to support you in doing that? And that's how we evolve, and we just become more, it's really becoming more aligned with our true self, becoming more aligned with our hearts, more aligned with love. Because if everyone was like really connected to themselves and feeling kind of whole and healed, as much as you can be healed, but like, then we wouldn't have all the issues we have in the world. Like, it's just
unnecessary. It seems unnecessary. Yeah, but I think, well, it will have to be the case. I think that's the ultimately, it will have to be, because there's no way out now. Like, the world is just, everything is revealed. Like, you either deal with it or you will destroy yourself and people around you, right? Ultimately, because things will not get easier, they will get harder. So what you need to do, the sooner you start working, the more chance you have that you will be resilient to what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the wonderful things about this time on earth. There's lots of stuff happening that we don't like, and it's not pleasant. But one of the things that we really are being presented with more and more opportunity to do is to look at ourselves, is to go within, is to do our healing work, is to address our mindset and our limiting beliefs and all of these things. Like, we're being squeezed, and it's almost like the universe is just like pushing us all to do this work. Because I really do think over time, as time goes on and the more and more things happen in our world, whatever that may be, if you're not in that place where you're like looking within and you're kind of doing that inner work, you're really going to struggle. Like, as you said, you're going to destroy yourself, because it all comes from within. How we feel about someone's communication, or how we feel about what's happening in the world, how we react to it, that all comes from within. And so when we can address that and really ultimately try and come back to, who we truly are, our true nature, like back to our hearts, live in more alignment with love rather than, fear and trauma, then, our own lives, our own health, our own lives are going to be a lot better. Our relationships are going to be better. And then the impact on the collective is better. And we're going to be much more able to navigate what comes and to just be resilient and not get completely destroyed by
and need much less stuff around us, and be less attached to stuff that's temporary and fleeting, and objects,
realizing what matters.
Realizing
what matters.
Right.
This is another thing. Like, people are starting again the last couple of years. I think it's really given people a kind of push to reassess their lives. I know so many people that have taken a look at their lives and said, well, I don't want to be doing this job. Like, I don't want to live like this. I don't need this. And people are changing it up. People are moving. People are doing all sorts of different things. And again, so it's a good opportunity to really look at like what really matters to me, like what's really important. Where do I want to focus my time, my energy, my money? Like, what is it that I actually want? And that can mean, it can mean moving, it can mean leaving a relationship, it can mean changing your your social circle. It could mean a number of things. But we have that opportunity now. And I think many people are taking that opportunity. And I speak with a lot of people who tell me the last 2.5 years has been like the best time ever. They're happier now than they ever have been. And I know it's different for everybody because everyone's having a different experience, but there are a lot of people who have said, this is the best thing that happened to me.
Certainly to me, because it makes you choose. There were a lot of forks on the road, and it makes you choose, make some radical choices, which otherwise in comfortable, stable situations, you're not forced to make. And we have made them. And those of us who made kind of daring ones, but aligned with what we truly want, I think all of those people are excited. I'm very excited. Like, there's so many kind of horizons, like really opening to the things that we could do in the future, because there is no paradigm. We are in between these paradigms, and the old one is dying and the new one is not here yet. And those most eager people, most interesting and kind of, committed to, some true, like committed to something deeply meaningful actions in the world, they're really active now, because now, wow, okay, so like it is like we've had all this training, we have this like personal, but then also academic. And I always felt like I always wanted to study philosophy, and I thought, people told me, why are you studying this philosophy? It's bullshit. Like it's gonna do IT or like some things that are like will be popular in the future. But now it seems like you need to be able to think properly, and like psychology and philosophy and all of these, like these will be increasingly, I believe, there'll be a demand. There'll be demand for these meta-systemic thinking. So that as the systems change and there's so much transformation going on the ground, you will need people who will really be able to communicate, think properly, coordinate, and so these kind of soft skills are really coming to the fore now, especially with as there are great populations of people so conditioned by the algorithmic environments of these social networks and so on, who have lost those skills. So these skills will be very important, like relational skills and social psychosocial. And I was gonna say something about also about what you said, all of these phenomena that's been going on over the last 2.5 years. There's a catalyst for change and for really seeking purpose, and a lot of people actually do want to find the purpose. And this seems like a very precious thing, because we live in a culture where the traditional ways of making sense of or making meaning, like religion, is dead. The kind of politics is just completely bankrupt, and people used to use like some frameworks that worked in 20th century, and suddenly all those frameworks are dissolving. So it's natural that people freak out, for you and I may be easier because we didn't believe, because we anti-authoritarian.
We've already had the big freak out in the
we already had a big freak out when we were like 15.
When 2020 came along, it was like, oh.
Sorry?
When 2020 came along, it was like,
yeah, but I mean, even like seeing through and distrust, because of our conditioning, distrusting authority, and because our authority figures were unreliable. But one of these catalyzing factors, I think, is again going back to how you communicate openly, because we both you and I do it in public domain. What it does is, yes, it does trigger. It's in your case, obviously, more apparently people react more, and it's
only
not
on LinkedIn.
Only on LinkedIn. But you say it's not useful, but it is actually useful, because speaking your mind is one of the consequences of the time, because shouldn't things be collapsing, you wouldn't feel the urgency to speak up. And then you think, okay, so there are people with families, with careers, with things, they have too much to, or they feel they have too much to lose. you don't. So there's this kind of sense of responsibility, almost like to do your best, and speak.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and sorry, and just finish the thought. And then people react, but also that's a catalyst for them too, because they may 2 months down the line, they may have a realization like, oh shit, actually that person could have been right, or maybe they're wrong, but I was a bit shitty. All of that, it's playing into the mix, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
especially language is becoming, and these technologies, it's so fascinating that we have these conversations and they're being shared, and you actually affect people's perception through this, and you can really peer into people's minds and observe these different kinds of multitude of conversations like this. And that used to be really limited to having to go to university or having to do this or that. And now this makes that obsolete, because you can get any lecture from top universities and any expert on, and that is, it's a spiritual awakening, because you can get any knowledge for, if you're passionate and you know what you want to do. I think that's the one thing, one of the biggest problems for people to know what they want. That's when you're happy. You can be upset, you can have bad phase or whatever, but if you know what you want from life, you're never really unhappy. You just have difficult times, but you know what your purpose is, you know what your goal is. So I think we have all the stuff, now we just need the direction, and people, I feel most of people would be struggling with redirecting themselves towards something that actually means a lot to them.
Yeah, totally. I agree with all the stuff that you said, actually, and there's a few things that came up for me. For me personally, this last 2.5 years it's been a roller coaster, but it's turned out to be the best thing, because now I am, I've been put into situations where I've had to face my stuff, right? I've stepped into, a real sense of purpose. I've become more connected to myself. I'm doing work that I really love. I have new connections with people who are aligned with me. For me, it's just like the best time, even though it's been painful at times, and it's been a roller coaster. It's not been a breeze, but ultimately, like, it's served me so well. Like, to who I've become now compared to who I was 3 years ago, like, totally different. So I feel like it has been this catalyst. It's just been this catalyst for growth and change and evolution. So that's the first thing. And then also, what you were saying about people, sometimes people being, when we're speaking out, and we're expressing and people are triggered, it can be a gift for them. So if we express consciously, so we try and, it's our responsibility to try and be conscious in how we're expressing and, how we're coming across. And it's our duty to ourselves to be authentic, because this is a fundamental need of ours, to be authentic, so to express, right? But how someone else interprets that, how the effect that has on someone else, is not your responsibility. It's your responsibility how you show up. How do you communicate? But if someone, one person will read it and they'll be like, oh, that's great. Like, I've never thought of something like that. I haven't thought of this like that before. And then you'll have another person who gets super angry. That's down to them. That's their stuff. And it isn't your responsibility. And so if they're triggered, that is an opportunity for them. They may or may not take it as an opportunity, but nonetheless, if I hadn't been triggered by the things I'd been triggered by, I would never have had the opportunity or even the awareness to start doing something about it. It's like, if you're stressed all the time and I can't remember where I was going to go with that part of the conversation. Sometimes I do this where I'm like mid-sentence and I'm like, oh, I forget what I was going to say.
I love it.
What was I going to say? Well, I was having a conversation with someone who's saying I'm just like stressed all the time and everything's like triggering me. If stuff wasn't triggering her, then she wouldn't have that stress, and that stress wouldn't be a problem, and therefore she wouldn't actually look to do anything about it. So it's like when we're in emotional pain and we're just in these patterns, it's like I keep getting upset, I keep getting stressed about what's happening in the world. Every time I go online, this is what's happening. It's like, that's an opportunity. And some people need to get to a point where they're in so much pain, it forces them to almost wake up and change. And so it's in the long run, it's a gift. If I look at all the hardships I went through at the time, it was terrible, but what a gift, because if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have had the wake up call, so to speak, to enter this period of transformation and just become such a happier, more whole person than I ever was before. So it isn't, if we try and keep everyone like happy and not upset anybody, that's people pleasing. Like that's just as bad. It's not our responsibility to make sure everyone is happy and doesn't get upset. It's really for us, I think, to be, to express authentically and consciously, and then whatever impact that has, it will have. And if we can all do that more, then it's going to help all of us as a
us. And the people who stay are badass, right? The people you want. You don't want someone who is there because you never said one thing that would upset them. It's like, no,
it's not helpful. And to be honest, like with
the relationship.
No, and it's also good to call each other out on stuff. Like if someone is behaving in a certain way, even if it's a friend, and you're like, oh, I think that's that's a bit mean or whatever, like communicate that. But
yeah, you have to.
We're afraid to, though. Most people, the biggest fear I see is conflict and what other people think or how other people might react. That's a really big wound driven thing for a lot of people. But again, it's an opportunity to work on it, because if you find that you're really struggling to be honest, or you're struggling to call someone out, in a respectful way, but if you're struggling with that, well, again, that's a gift, because that tells you, like, why am I struggling with that? Like, where's that coming from? And because this is how we help each other to grow and to be better. Yes, be supportive. Yes, be encouraging. Yes, inspire others. But also, call them out and be honest. It's like kind of tough love sometimes. It's like, be honest with people, because that's going to help them. If you're behaving in a way which isn't great, or isn't particularly helpful, or is causing, issues, if you're doing that and everyone around you keeps quiet, well, how do you know that you don't have anyone to mirror it back to you? So you're like, that's not helpful for you. So I see it as I really do try and see it as a helpful thing. If I'm kind of bringing something up to somebody, I'm genuinely, and that's the intention, it's to help them. It's not to try and shame them or to make out they're wrong. It's like just bringing that awareness to it and holding up that mirror and giving them the opportunity to look at that. Because if I've had lots of people call me out on my stuff. Like, I had people say, no, Laura, that's just your paradigms, like you're just like, you're blocking yourself. Like I have people that will give me that feedback in a respectful, and often very light-hearted way. But I'm so grateful for it, because if I didn't have people mirroring back to me and feeding back to me, like, we're relational beings, so we need those interactions, and we need yes, the encouragement and all of that stuff, but also the kind of honesty. It's the honesty.
Yeah, that, and when that when you have a certain degree of certainty, it's not done in bad faith, but it's actually coming from a good place, then you can really respect that. Yeah, because it's not cheap. The person is ready to create an uncomfortable situation because it's helpful for you and it's helpful for them and for your relationship.
Yes, and so much growth can come from that. If the intentions are good, you know, like the intentions are positive and kind of more you know, from the heart, it's very powerful and it can be a real gift. And sometimes people can see things in you that you're not seeing. It doesn't mean you have to take what they say on face value, because, you know, there's a lot of people that will tell you stuff and you go, no, it doesn't really resonate with me. I just don't believe that. So it's up for us to discern what's helpful for us. But it's so valuable. It's so powerful for us to be able to, you know, be honest with each other and just, yeah, call each other out a little bit, you know, from a loving place. But to do that, I think is a real gift. And again, if we're feeling really awkward about doing that, then that's our own thing. And I can relate to that because I have a history of people pleasing and, you know, trying to keep the peace and not wanting to hurt anybody and not wanting to upset anybody, which comes from you know, my childhood. But I've worked a lot on that. So, you know, now I can practice kind of being honest with people.
Assertive communication.
Yeah, it's assertive and it's loving communication. So it goes back to the intention. Where is it coming from? Are you trying to get one over on them? Is it the ego kind of trying to get to them? Or are you genuinely like, I genuinely want to give this feedback or challenge this person because it's, you know, I think it could be helpful for them. And then it's up for them to decide whether it's helpful or not. Yes.
You know, that used to be my issue as well. I'm sure to some extent it's still the people pleasing and being the soul of the party and whatever, you know, everyone loves all that bullshit, you know. And I really like the quote, if you avoid conflict at any cost, you start a war inside yourself. Yeah, it's so true. And actually not having this boundary, not having this, you know, just keeping peace at any cost, you actually start a war, and it leads to war, because once war is inside you, you will seek a victim, and you will just to project that further. And also what it does is it makes you deceitful. And I think I've been thinking and working within the field of truth telling and like truth, the idea of truth and the idea of, obviously there's different theories about truth and whatever, you know, like academics argue about that. But we can, like you said, you can be truthful as an individual because you believe something to be genuinely true, and you want to communicate that in the least confrontational way you can, but honestly, right? And if you sometimes stay silent, because the proclivity to politeness is so strong, especially when you're face to face, and especially when you come from the Anglo-Saxon culture, it's like it's almost like the fundamental thing. Like you have to be polite. Even like, you know, me, when someone told me like invited, you should come to dinner sometime, and I actually believed that I'm invited to dinner. That was just a figure of speech, so that's another thing. But no,
oh gosh,
that was radical. I was like, oh dear, that's a culture shock. And that was like, I don't know, after like maybe 8 years of living in the UK. But now what I was going to say, when you keep peace, allowing injustice to, you know, basically someone does or says something that is harmful or abusive or wrong, you know, you by your standards, you think you should be speaking up. If you don't, it doesn't mean you can do it every time. You won't be able to do it every single time, but you must be aware that you agree with the wrongdoing if you say nothing in presence of that, because and then you become deceitful because you hold one value and you silently endorse another.
You're not in alignment.
And you're already creating a cognitive dissonance within yourself, which then pushes you away from who you really are. So you're already creating chaos inside yourself. You're already polluting something that you've been maybe working for, you know, like that's not your direction for becoming a better person. So So this conflict, I think, there was some post when people talked about liberty and conflict, and yeah, your liberty is my end of mine, and I'm like, no, like one thing is war and hatred and violence. That's conflict out of control. But conflict in terms of language is actually having an argument, and like you said, calling each other out, and trying to sublimate where the disagreement will be a catalyst, where what is less important will collapse, and what is more precious will be retained, and like it will help us transcend the egotistical attachment to being right. Yeah, so because we will, through argument helps it, because if you care, if the relationship is meaningful enough, you will care about that person's view and opinion. So you will be likely to question yourself, even where you don't want to, but it will be in the long term. You will actually evolve into a more accurate, understanding of yourself and the world.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, and I think that we've spoken about this before, but when you don't speak up, you're betraying yourself. When you have something inside you that wants to come out, and you don't, it just kind of stays stuck, and then it just kind of like festers inside you, and then also, especially if it's something that in your heart is not right, you see harm being done, you see things like injustices, and you feel and you care about it, but then you don't say anything, that really creates a lot of internal pain, and over time it becomes unbearable. And so I think, if you struggle with speaking up, with people pleasing and all those things, which most people do, to be honest, or at least have done. I mean, I spent my life, struggling with this. I think, okay, just recognize that. And then there's lots you can do to shift out of it. There's baby steps you can take. There's healing that you can do. There's all sorts of, this is saying no work I do. You can just, but you need to learn how to do that, right? So this is the thing. It's easy to say, well, people should just speak up, or people should just say no. But when you have trauma and conditioning that's preventing you from doing that on a kind of very subconscious bodily level, it's really difficult. But there's lots of, I do this work, there's like other people that do this work, there's lots of ways you can go on YouTube and find videos to do this work. Like, this is what I did, you can go and you can just learn, but you just have to be willing. And this is what I did. I read some books, watched some videos, started doing some practices, and then trying things out. And then just over time, just shedding some of those old layers that were kind of blocking me, and then stepping more into into being more me, and just being more authentic. So yeah, it's very powerful,
and it takes courage. Ultimately, courage, isn't it?
It's scary.
It is scary, and it really, courage, I think, will be one of the virtues that will be very fundamental in this coming time, because and it will benefit all of us to practice it. And online is a good way of starting, isn't it? Because you have that, you don't have that direct accountability. You have accountability. I mean, yeah, somewhere like LinkedIn, I suppose it's more because it's your career or whatever, your professional stuff. But in any case, you are not in physical space, so you can articulate things and see how it works. If it doesn't trigger, how does it work? Do you feel, what is the reaction? And then just have this metacognitive, this bird's view side of yourself, how you react to whatever the interaction is, but yeah, I think, people really want comfort, and the culture itself, isn't it? We've been really brainwashed into being these soft cupcakes who just kind of go along with whatever the bullshit new thing comes up. And
I'm no cupcake.
I'm not cupcake, but But like, if you're not a cupcake, because you're a conspiracy theorist, that's why you're a cupcake. You know, and it's this indoctrination into having no boundaries, isn't it? And then we have the online environments, which also don't have boundaries, because it's just endless scrolling, endless clicking, endless. So the whole idea of bounded environment is kind of alien to the way we live lives. And then you have, you know, the pluralism of ideas, and the postmodernism and postmodern, you know, the whole there's no values, and there's no genders, everything is just like there are no boundaries. So people really find it difficult to dare to have boundaries, but even boundaries in terms of how you communicate, and when you say no, and when you call people out, and when you speak out, you know.
Boundaries are so important.
And you need to find your own center. So there's nothing outside. You can really, there's no compass out there. You have to start with the gut feeling, and you know, you say what's true in your heart, and before you go into the mind, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think connecting within, the mind is helpful, but really connecting within this is where our real wisdom is. This is where, you know, our feelings are. Like, it's just so important for us to keep being connected, and just seeing it as a journey, learning, practicing, changing things, reflecting on things. Like, that's just the journey. So there we go.
And yes, and building networks, and being curious of people, and trying to coordinate and learn even from most unlikely people, maybe, you know, people you wouldn't consider. But like you said, the last thing I was gonna say, separating wheat from the chaff. Yeah, like, even if, let's say, there's 85% of noise, there might be 5% of the message that you will never get anywhere else. To dig through that, you know, someone can, you know, want to tell you something, and you completely disagree, but if you keep your emotions in check, and you can actually look through what they're saying, there might be that precious little bit that no one else will tell you. So there's always learning in every.
I think it's just being open, but also at the same time, given there is such an overwhelming amount of information and opinions and shares and everything out there, we also have to be very discerning about where we even want to put our energy. You know, people will often send me articles to read or videos to watch, and they're like, you have to watch this, and I'm like, no, I'm not. That's not where I want to put my time. You know, I don't need to spend time trying to understand what somebody else is saying if it's just not really something of interest to me, right? So we have to be really discerning, because a lot of us get sucked in to stuff that isn't really meaningful to us at the time. And then our time and energy just totally goes, and then, you know, hours have gone by and we've wasted all that time. And so I think, we have to be, you know, discernment is actually very important and very powerful. So most of the stuff that people send me saying like, oh, this is really interesting, I'm like, well, I'm sure it is, but I've got other, like, I've got
1,000 years of life.
I've got so many things to do. Like, I could spend 24 hours a day my entire life consuming content, and I would never consume it all. It's just like you have to be discerning.
Yes, and this is the attention economy, isn't it? Because I still get people, even like the friend of mine who's an IT developer, and he was like, I was surprised, because he was talking about the internet, like, it's free. Oh, he got himself the Meta,
oh no,
the thing, you know, what is it called? The Oculus.
Oh, gosh.
And he was like, it's free. I'm like, it's free what? It's money free. But
money free, yeah.
What about attention? You don't pay money, so what do you pay? And he did not realize that. He's extremely smart guy, you know? So I'm like, fucking hell, that's really profound, how you can be within a bubble and not really be aware of this attention economy, because you end up consuming and consuming. Like you said, March 2020, same thing happened to me. Just get down to the rabbit hole, and after a week, you're completely disheveled. You just can't think for yourself. You completely like. I got really unwell.
Wild.
I almost had like a mental breakdown.
Yeah, well, I think most of us did. And look, I think there's a time for that, especially if you're just suddenly starting to become aware of certain things. You're naturally going to want to jump in and start to learn about that stuff. But then there comes a time, you know, and I keep saying this, once you're aware of the big picture and the agendas and all of that stuff, any more time you're spending consuming content, you've got to question where the value is there and what are you spending, because you're spending your time and your energy, even if you're not spending your money, which is the point that you're just making. And so, yeah, I think it's just an awareness. Where are you spending your time and energy? Where are you spending your money? Like, what are you spending your time doing? Is it serving you? Is it helpful? Like, it's just asking ourselves these questions and being aware. I think that's really the key thing.
Right, because it's still communication. It's still content, it's still communication systems, and more speech and more images to take in. And there was one thing, I was once doing a training, and the guy said, a good way of, it really helped me, like a good way of assessing this is especially when you're active and you do some business or kind of you care about being present online. What is the ratio of the online content consumed to online content created? That's a good kind of balance, because if you mostly consume and you don't create valuable content, then you're wasting your life to some degree. And, so it's good to have that in mind. That is just healthy, isn't it? Because it's balanced. And your attention we need to treat it as sacred. I think that's what Tristan Harris said. I fully agree. Like, we need this kind of wisdom of your attention is only 24 hours, and those companies they all compete for your attention, all of those platforms. So you need to really, and where you pay your attention, that changes your life and your thinking and everything. So
yeah, and this comes back to boundaries. This is, boundaries is not just about other people. Boundaries is boundaries with ourselves. Like, if we're saying to ourselves like, oh, I don't want to waste my time and stuff, and then we're spending hours and hours online consuming content, and then we're like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore, and then we just keep doing it. We're just breaking our own boundaries. Like, we're kind of on autopilot almost, just doing this stuff. And so again, being aware of it and then working on breaking that habit, because it's become an addiction by design for many, many people. And I've been there. I've been in the rabbit hole addiction. It's just like constantly consuming content, just wanting to know more and more and more. And then you get to a point where you have to ask, what am I actually doing to improve my life? What am I actually doing to improve the life of others? How am I serving? Like, is the stuff I'm doing valuable? Is it meaningful? Because if it's not, well, why am I doing it? And then you can look at that. And so again, it's just this communicating with the self, and just looking within us and working on the things that we need to work on.
How it feels as well, not because understanding it, one thing, but when you feel dirty because you spent 45 minutes scrolling, that's for a reason, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, it starts with the feeling, right? It always starts with the feeling. You're like, I'm impure. I've done it many, many times before. Where I would get up in the morning and I would say, right, today I'm going to do my meditation and my exercise, and I'm not going to, spend time online. I'm going to do this, this piece of work. And then there I am with my coffee on Telegram, looking at like all the conspiracy videos, and then it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
And then I would feel so awful. Like, I would just feel this horrible, like, oh no, like, what have I done? And so, yeah, it's the feeling is first, but then to stop yourself continuing to repeat it, because it's a pattern, it's a habit, it's an addiction, whatever. you have to then move into, let me take a look at this, like what's happening, or what could I do to prevent me from doing this? Like what could I change in my environment to like kind of prevent this? Or, you know, you're just trying to craft like new habits, and you're really retraining yourself, because we have been trained for a long time now to be addicted to our screens. And I have not met anybody, especially in the like kind of truth community, I haven't met anybody who doesn't have a form of like, or hasn't had a form of like this online addiction. So I think it's really, really common. And even for me now, it's still something I have to be really mindful of. And I've created new habits that mean I'm not constantly online, and I do create a lot of content, and I do my work and all of these things. So it's like I have a, you know, really healthy balance now, but in the past it did get a bit wild.
So tell us, because I will share my habits as well, but share your useful habits, what works for you as well, so it will be helpful for people.
Okay, I will. I'm almost out of time, but I'll share quickly. I mean, I think when you're trying to change certain behaviors, like there's lots of different, you know, ways you can do it. There's lots of, you know, you need to look at your inner stuff as well. But like in terms of like practical habits, like one thing that I do is I actually turn my phone off at night, like completely.
Yeah.
And I have it in a drawer. And so even just something as simple as that, when I wake up in the morning, it's not just there on, but it's not as tempting. It's not, you know, it's like I literally have to go over to the phone, turn it on, wait for it, like all of this. So I have it there. And so when I get up, I will, you know, the first thing I will do, go to the bathroom, and then I will do a meditation. And so I just got into that as a habit.
And journal as handwritten journaling afterwards, no?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. I mean, I usually journal, but I usually just do like kind of gratitude journaling. And I'll journal if anything significant comes up during a meditation. You know, I'll get hydrated, and, you know, obviously have some water. And then I try to, you know, set myself I actually set myself a timer, like I set an alarm, like a timer.
Yeah, me too.
And I go online to check, you know, just to check my channels, like just to check, like, you know, if I've got messages and things like that, not to just scroll. And I'll have like 30 minutes, and I will, you know, and I will do my 30 minutes, and it goes beep, 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 and it goes off. And then I'm like, okay, and I have to like put it down, and then, you know, I get into my work. And there's other things that I do, but it's really just getting these, introducing a new habit one at a time. Trying to change everything in one go never works long term.
That's right. And it's always like, it boils down to kind of learning to treat yourself as like a 5-year-old in a way, because you need to create frameworks around yourself that will help you make it easier. So I switch my phone off as well. Let's say usually I switch technology like 8:30 or whatever. Then I switch the phone and I sleep, and, you know, in the morning I go running or whatever. And then sometimes I just leave the house without a phone as well, which is useful. And because these, you know, the algorithms and the technology behind the screen, you know, we don't realize that, but they play chess against our minds, and our minds are not as smart. Computationally, they're not as smart. And the more we stay on these platforms, the more we also prone to take in stuff that's just targeted to confuse us, and not, you know, there's computational propaganda and all sorts of stuff going on. So yeah, media diet is absolutely in order. Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. That was pretty another juicy one for
yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. See you awesome. Next week, and see you everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Okay.
Stop.